All right. So welcome everyone. My name is Marissa Shallcross. I'm one of the assistant directors in the Career Development Center. So basically means I'm a career counselor and I meet with students individually for appointments about resumes, cover letters, internship search, any sort of career related questions, as well as doing presentations and workshops like this one. So today we're talking about the upcoming virtual internship fairs and specifically how to prep for them. So we're going to go over having a professional resume, and then we're going to go into communicating professionally during the fair, which is all virtual on those 2 days. So one fair is Tuesday the 16th, that is for the School of the Arts, and the other is Thursday the 18th for School of Communications. Both fairs are 12 to 3 p.m. on Handshake. So let's get started in talking about professionalism. So as we get into that, I just wanted to go over quickly a few of our key resources for all of you to know about. CareerBuzz is what we use for all of our career related information. So we have several resource guides that you can, like PDFs that you can check out at any time, from sample resumes to guides on how to find an internship or how to network or how to interview. So I definitely encourage you to check this out. And Handshake, of course, is where you signed up for this event and you can sign up for appointments there. And that's where you can also register for the fair. So I just want to, before I go into the rest, just pull up those two sites quickly so you can see what they look like. So this is CareerBuzz. So this is the main page here. And under undergraduates, if you go to resource library, this is where you can find kind of anything you might need that's career related. So the career guides are for different industries. So there's like a marketing guide, there's a VMA guide, there's a BCE guide. So for basically all of our majors and career fields, we have a guide for, where you can find more industry specific resources and information. This resumes folder has several sample resumes. It has a cover letter guide. It has some information on portfolios. If you scroll down, I mentioned there's an interview guide here. We have internship search resources like an internship search guide and a guide on safely searching for internships online, networking resources, and then some more specific resources down here. So I would save this site for sure. Make sure you have access to it. Another thing that I'll be mentioning later that I'll just show you now is under this tab, you can click on this resume and cover letter reviews. So a quick way to get a resume and or a cover letter reviewed is just to submit to our online checkup. So you can do that here through this page on Handshake. You just fill out, on CareerBuzz, you just fill out a Google form that asks you some questions about what you'll be using the resume or cover letter for, and you just submit it and we get back to you within about 3 business days. So you can also schedule an appointment to have your materials reviewed, but this is a quick and easy way to do that. And then on Handshake, you all are probably familiar with this because, like I said, I'm sure you signed up for today's event there. But you can look at our events here. So if you haven't signed up for the fairs yet, you can go to events, and under career fairs, that's where you can sign up for either of the virtual fairs. Once you register, then you can schedule sessions to meet one-on-one or in a group session, depending on what they offer with the organizations attending. So today we're going to be talking about how to speak to the employers during those sessions, but I want to make sure you know where to access the sign up for those. So let me get back into the workshop. Let's see. Okay. So that being said, what we're going to talk about today is, first, I'm going to talk about professional resume and give you some tips on making sure you're putting together a resume that you can use at the fair. How to prepare before, which is really important for any type of career fair or interview. Preparation is, I think, is the biggest component when it comes to success. How to follow up with employers after the fair, and then we're going to talk about some common mistakes that people might make at a professional event. So for internship fair prep, like I said, we're going to talk about preparing your resume. So you want to make sure it's updated and error-free, and I'm going to go into more detail on that. And then prepping for the fair really revolves around researching. So you're going to be looking at the list of employers attending, which you can see for each fair. When you click on it, you can see all the employers coming. You're going to be preparing questions and having notes on who you're speaking to. And that'll be based on who you sign up to talk to. So let's talk about a resume first. many students that I meet with, so some of you might be in different phases of having a professional resume. If you don't have one yet at all, that's okay. We're going to talk about how to build one. A lot of times when students get to college, you have a resume that's some version of something you had to put together for your college application, which might be sort of a long list of like activities and things you've done. What we talk to you about is creating a professional resume that you can use for or professional resumes that you can use, because it's not one size fits all, that are going to be able to summarize your experiences and accomplishments and sort of serve as your like sales pitch or sales document when you're trying to sell your skills and experiences to prospective employers. And it could be for an internship. It could be you have a resume for, say, part-time jobs. You might need a resume for some on-campus clubs and orgs. So there's different reasons that you might need a resume, which is why, like I said, it's not one size fits all. Sort of basic rules are we generally want your resume to be one page and reverse chronological order within each section, which we're going to break down further. And the reason it says here targeted versus master, this is what I suggest, is that you keep sort of a long running master resume on your computer that you just kind of add everything to, and you can have lots of bullet points and detail, and that can be as long as you want. But then you're going to have targeted resumes depending on what you're applying for. So the resume you use to apply to, say, a part-time job on campus, maybe in an office, is likely to be different than a resume that you might use for an on-campus club or for an internship. There's, even if a lot of the same things are on there, there might be some differences in terms of the sections or the order that you put your sections in. So it's good to have the master resume, because then you can kind of pull things from it as needed, and you'll likely eventually have a few basic versions of your resume that you tweak depending on what you're applying for. So to get started in creating a professional resume, the first thing I would do is brainstorm. So think about kind of everything that you've done. It's not necessarily, I'm not necessarily saying that every single thing is going to go on there, because again, we want it to be one page, but kind of just do a brainstorm. So think about your education. So Emerson, of course, your major, what you're pursuing here. If you've done any sort of summer programs or certificate programs, you might have high school on your resume. Like usually we take that off towards the end of sophomore year, but before that, it's probably going to be on there. Think of anything you've done on campus, school activities. If you're freshman or sophomore, think about what you've done in high school, leadership experience, volunteer experience. If you've had any significant projects that you've done, whether they're for class or personal projects, but they're relevant to what you're looking for, I would write those down. Any part-time jobs you've had, even if you're thinking like summer camp counselor is not related to this internship, like it probably is actually going to go on your resume. So any part-time jobs, and then skills, focusing mainly on hard skills or technical skills like software skills, equipment, language, as opposed to soft skills, which are more like people or interpersonal skills. So this slide's about how to start your resume. So there are a lot of templates out there. You can, if you go on Word or Google Docs or Canva, there are several different resume templates. It can be an easy sort of starting off point to kind of create that like first professional resume. And I'm not completely against templates, but there are limitations. So a few sort of things that can occur when you use a template is, I can tell you that a lot of times there's one particular Google Docs template that I see over and over and over. I see it like, and I'll tell people like, it's okay to use this if it's easiest for you, but consider that your resume may look almost identical to other people in that stack. So you want to think about that. So like if you are going to use a template, I'd really recommend customizing as much as you can with like the font size or like the color that they use. Templates can also be a little tricky in the future. It can make it hard as you get more experience and try to fit more things in to work with like the spacing, depending upon how restrictive that template is. And the other thing is, and I notice this particularly on Canva, they'll often have some sections and items you don't need. Like you do not need, I wouldn't put a photo on your resume. You do not typically need like a summary section or a profile section, or often you don't need an objective. Those are more often I would see used for like career changers or someone who really maybe if you like changed your major and you did something completely different before, but usually you don't need it. And we could always work with you one-on-one to figure out if you do. But a lot of times these templates, particularly like I said on Canva, have these extra sections. So I say go ahead, and if you want to use something like Canva, that's fine, but just make sure you're really customizing it and not having extra sections that are not included in kind of the recommendations we have in the rest of this workshop. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. Like you can use Word. I've seen resumes in InDesign or Photoshop. I've seen a lot in Canva, Google Docs. So there's a lot of different programs you can use starting from scratch or with a template, but it sort of depends on how, what your skills are and what you're interested in having on your resume. And this can also bring up the question that's related as to whether or not to use sort of like a simple black and white resume or to use something that's more design oriented, like the ones on Canva in particular are very colorful. I would say that most of the industries here at Emerson are, it's okay to use some design elements, at least to have some color, to have some design. You don't want the design to be overwhelming. So that's something I think, like, whether you have one of us in the Career Center or even ask like some friends and family members, like, is this overwhelming to you? You don't want the design to be like what people notice and like to overwhelm your content, essentially. Like the most important thing I think is that it's easy for me to quickly skim your resume and get a sense of what you've done and your relevant experience for what you're applying for. So if you can do that best with sort of a simple resume, that's great. You could even like add just a little bit of color to it. Like maybe your heading stands out. Your heading always should stand out to some degree, but maybe your heading is designed, or maybe your section headers are in color, or you use a different font for your heading versus the rest or something. So there are a lot of different things you can do, and part of it's your comfort level. But the biggest thing, like I said, is that I can easily digest your content and that the design does not overwhelm your experience and make it harder for me to see that. So we can always help you gauge if it's too much or if you could do more. That's sort of my general take on it. So here's a basic resume structure. You'll see our resumes, like I said, on CareerBuzz. We have several samples that you can check out. This is a basic structure. The heading and contact info is pretty much near the top. Education, as a current student, your education should really be first. It's kind of the closest thing you have to a full-time experience in that field would be your education. And related experience is next. There could be different names for these sections, like related experience. You could get really specific if it's all, say, marketing experience and that's what you're gearing towards, but just calling it related experience is totally fine. This sample is from one of our sample VMA resumes. This one has an other production experience section. That could be something else depending upon what you've done and what you're applying for. But most often I see students have the related experience and then an additional experience section and then skills towards the bottom. But like everything else with resumes, it depends. So much, like I've kind of alluded to earlier, depends on what you've done and what you're going for. So while there's some sort of universal things like that, I really want your resume to be one page, at least for now in your career. Other things really do depend on your situation. So the header. So in the header, you want to have, of course, your name, and your name should stand out to some degree, even if it's just a bigger font or it's bold or something like you can see in the example here. City and state, you don't really need a full address anymore. I think so. Just city and state is fine if you're local. If you're not local, you can just have email and phone. Contact info, so your phone number and a professional email address, like some form of your name at Gmail, say, or you can use your Emerson email, especially if you're applying for like things on campus or for internships. So possible links that might also go in your contact header information. If you have a LinkedIn profile, you can add the URL there. If you have a professional website, portfolio, reel, if you're using social media professionally, and of course you want to be careful with this, but if you are using it professionally and it's something like, say it is kind of your portfolio, if you're like a photographer or journalist or something like that, you can consider sharing that. But again, just be careful with that. So that's generally the kind of things that will go up here in your header. And then this is an example of sorry. Now we jump into education information. So like I said, education should pretty much go first. Each section on your resume goes in reverse chronological order. So within the education section, because you're a current student at Emerson, even if you transferred from another school, Emerson should go first. And then previous schools or certificate programs, summer programs, things like that would go beneath. If you're in your first or second year of school, you can have your high school on there, but likely you're going to take it off after that. Make sure your resume is listed correctly. Sometimes I see this incorrectly, and if you're not sure, check your degree audit or even just your department webpage on Emerson's website. Are you pursuing a Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science? You want that to be correct, and write your major name correctly. Include minors here. We say if your GPA is 3.7 or above, or say if you're applying to an internship with like a minimum GPA requirement and you meet that, you can include it. You don't really have to have your GPA on here in general, but those are sort of our general guidelines. If you have academic honors, like, specific merit-based scholarship or dean's list, things like that can go on here as well. Occasionally you might include relevant courses or course projects, or you might include like a membership, like the second example, the WLP student in the second example here shows a member of a student club. And that's something that might go here if you don't want to include it with more detail later. So maybe this student in this example had other things beneath and didn't have room to include that, so they put the membership there. But there are cases where like your student clubs and orgs might be detailed more fully in the following sections, which you'll see some examples to that effect in a bit. So again, it depends, but these are just some examples of things you might be including within that education section. Oh, and one other thing that I see a lot is students giving us a date range for their education. We really only need to know when you completed a program. So like when you got your high school diploma, or when you expect to finish at Emerson, like you can see in that first one, expected graduation. It doesn't really matter when you started. So next up are the experience sections. So like I said earlier, most often that first section after education is related or relevant experience, though you could have a more specific title as long as it's accurate to the content in there. One thing I see fairly often on resumes that you don't need to do is breaking up your experience into like what it is as opposed to what's most relevant. So by that, I mean, I'll see a resume that like the first section is like internship experience, and then I see work experience, and then I see, say, on-campus experience. I'm more concerned about, while you're applying for internships, I'm more concerned about what you've done that's most relevant to what you're applying for than I am about like what type of thing it is, if that makes sense. So your first related experience section, maybe it has like one internship, one on-campus club, and one volunteer role, because those are what you feel like are your three most relevant and significant things for what you're applying for. It could be like all campus orgs at this point, and that's, everything is stepping stones. So like getting your first internship, often you're showcasing things you've done in class or on campus or maybe part-time jobs. And then as you get an internship, then you're adding more professional experience into that related experience section. The additional experience section is typically reserved for other sort of jobs that show transferable skills. So a transferable skill is often more of those soft skills that you develop in one setting but can transfer to another. So like teamwork and communication, and it could be organizational skills. It could be like, I don't know, those are all examples of them there. And so they can be often used, or customer service is a big one. They can often be used in almost any job environment, but you acquired them in something that's in a different industry or different type of job than what it is you're applying for. So often if you've had like part-time, say, summer jobs, if you like those general, more like pay the bills type jobs, if you've had some volunteer work and you don't have so much that you want to put it in its own section, that could also go under additional experience. So as you're developing these experiences, what's really important to think about is how you're talking about them. I sometimes see resumes that are sort of just a list of experiences without much detail. Like, so you might have your position name and where you worked and when you worked there, but not give me any cohesive like information about what you contributed while you were there. And that information is really, really important, especially in that first related experience section. You'll see on our resume samples as things go further down to like sort of the less relevant information, like sometimes in the additional experience section, or if someone has a section for some on-campus clubs that they're strictly like a member of or that aren't related to their field, they might just sort of list those like title and what it was. But for that related experience section in particular, I want to see strong bullet points that show me what you contributed. As you can see here, you can use paragraph style, which could be like, short phrases. It's going to save room to do that. But bullets are much easier to skim. So I think whenever possible, I encourage you to use them. It's not wrong to do the paragraph style if you much prefer that, but I do find the bullets much easier to skim. Each bullet is going to start with what we call an action verb. And the action verbs are actually showcasing a lot of your skills. So then when I skim down, the first word at, on each bullet point are showing me that first word on each one is showing me a strong skill that you have. So it could be like managed, communicated, oversaw, edited, whatever it might be. But then I quickly skim that and those skills are going to jump out at me. So like I said, whenever possible, you want to think about using bullets. We're going to talk next about developing or show you an example to show you components of strong bullet points. But yeah, like I said, I'd recommend bullets if you can, and you really want to think about, so you exclude the personal pronouns and you want to use those action verbs to start each bullet to showcase that skill. So here's just to kind of break that down. Your bullets, you want to think about accomplishments, not just a list of duties. So it shouldn't just be your job description. I want you to think about what did I contribute or accomplish while I was there? It's going to be hard. Like you won't necessarily have every single bullet point. It's going to be like a major, like huge contribution, but you really want to, as much as possible, show what you accomplished. You want to begin with a strong action verb as opposed to starting with the personal pronoun like I. So you jump right into that verb. It's like as if you're saying a sentence that started with I, but you drop the I. So when it's in the present tense for things that you're currently doing, it would be like I manage. So you drop the I and it would just be like manage and then you finish the bullet. If it's in the past tense, it would be managed. I sometimes see things written like managing, like overseeing, communicating. I would just have it in like the current present tense as though you had the personal pronoun I and then you took it away. I think it's for resumes, it's mainly to save space. And now it's sort of like a resume thing. And for consistency, you do want to keep those personal pronouns off. As much as possible in your bullets, and this will help with the accomplishment piece, try to show the result or purpose of your action. Give us context, like, if you have an internship where say you have a development internship and you're reading scripts, like you could say you're just, you read script submissions or submissions of say like books and scripts and whatever it may be. But if you tell me you did like X per week, X number of scripts per week that you wrote coverage on, and you provided it directly to the, say, executive producer, that shows me a larger scope of your work, right? So I'm seeing how many you did. So the frequency, the amount, how much you're contributing to that company over your time there. And then I'm seeing that you interface directly with a higher up at the company. So again, you might not always have this, but when you do, you definitely want to include that. So the numbers, how much, how many, the context, like who it was for, what it was for, what the result was whenever you have a result. If you're ever talking about things like marketing and social media, like if you ever have statistics on following or engagement, those can be big. Even if it's showing how many people you worked with or how many people you oversaw or hired, like say you're working on a student club and you had to hire other students to work with. Those can really be powerful and help to really show how much you were doing and take it beyond strictly like a job description. Other things that help to strengthen it is really don't use phrases like in charge of or duties included or responsible for, because then essentially what you give me is just a long list of duties. And using the action verbs, I mean, it's probably going to be hard to never use the word assisted. You might have to use that, say, once on your resume. but because maybe you were essentially like working as an assistant at a past internship or something like that, but really try not to use assisted, worked, or helped whenever you can. And that's because when I see something that starts with helped or worked, like say you say something like helped with event planning, you could have done anything. Like you could have sat in on one meeting, or you could have literally reached out to 10 organizations to seek, food for the event or whatever it might be, which is going to tell me a lot more. So I want to know what you actually did, as a in what you were like, if you were assisting, what were you actually doing? And that's going to tell me a lot more about your capabilities. And then you want to mix up your action verbs, and not use the same one over and over. So in that, I showed you the Career Buzz page with the resume folder, and there is a list of action verbs there. I also personally will just like use this thesaurus.com, or if I'm using like Word, you can look in the thesaurus too to find other verbs that might fit. So here's a good example that shows strong bullet points, and I can tell you why. So this is a student talking about a high school job where they worked as a videographer. So there's good detail here. So they show directly who they worked with, why, like what they were collaborating on. They tell you they scheduled not just student videographers, but 5 of them, and they tell you why they did that. So the purpose. They edited how many hours of footage, and we're able to distill that into 5-minute highlight reels. So that shows me their skill as an editor. Shows me exactly who they communicated with, and why, again, like what the result was. They were troubleshooting. And then they give this statistic about social media and what they created and the following that they grew over a short period of time. So it gives me a lot of information, and they could have essentially just said that they did some, shot some footage at high school football games, but this gives me so much more detail about what they're capable of. And then here's some other examples. So like I said, there could be a variety of sections depending upon exactly what you want to show. You could have a section that just shows, say, volunteer experience if you have had a good amount of it, or maybe you have one strictly for on-campus orgs if you don't feel like they fit into another place on your resume. Sometimes you could have a section for relevant course projects if you feel like you have some significant projects that you really want to showcase. So these 2 examples just show you how you could set that up, like what that could potentially look like. And then we can always work with you on reviewing your resume to make sure that that makes sense for what you're trying to get across. And then the last section on a resume is typically your skills section. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but you're going to focus here more on hard or technical skills, like measurable skills. So that's software, language, and equipment if it's relevant to your field. And then you don't need to include the soft skills. Those are typically going to show up in your bullet points, like through those action verbs and through your descriptions of what you contributed. And unrelated, like software or technical equipment skills, you don't need to include those either. So this section can be pretty simple. It can look something like this. I mean, there's a variety of ways you can set it up, but it can be pretty simple. And if you're not sure like what skills to include, like looking at some job descriptions for potential internships and seeing what they're asking for can give you an idea. And I would always recommend updating this too. Like if you apply to different positions that, in general, like I think if you're applying to similar positions, they're probably going to be pretty similar, but you always I would recommend always checking before you send it off to a different position to make sure that they're not asking for something that's not on your resume. And of course, you're always being honest. You're only including things that you are able to use. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to check the job descriptions and make sure you're including what they have on there. So things to remember about your resume. We've talked about how it needs to be targeted. So you're likely to have more than one version of your resume, at least at some point, if you're applying to different types of positions. The related experience section towards the top really helps to pull your most relevant experiences. So they're sort of in that first section, because like we said, the resume is going to go in reverse chronological order. So by separating it into related and additional experience, we make sure that the most relevant ones are pulled to the top, even if maybe one of your like additional experiences is slightly more recent than one of those. The resume should kind of tell your story. Like I should be able to hopefully skim your resume and sort of get a sense of what what it's geared towards, like what you're going for. Your resume really should be written for what you want to do. It shouldn't just be a list of everything you've ever done. Like, you're always being honest and truthful, but it's a matter of being able to portray it so that someone else can easily get a sense of what you've done that's relevant for them. So like, you're gearing it towards a specific audience, and you're using the different sections on the resume, and you're basing what you include on the resume for who that audience is and what they need to know about your skills and experience. So job descriptions, I just mentioned this, but check out the job description, see what they're looking for, what their priorities are, and that might help you be able to figure out too, like what's most important and relevant for them. We want it to be one page, want it to be error-free. So grammar, spelling, tenses, all of that is really important. So, have other people look at it too. I have a hard time proofreading my own work because I know what it's supposed to say. So, having some other people skim it and look at it for you is good. And also having them skim it just to ask them how they feel when they look at it too. Consistent formatting. So you want to, make sure you're using the same style throughout. Like, how are you formatting your position titles? How are you formatting your organization names? You don't need periods at the end of your bullet points. And it's okay if you have them, but you don't need them. But you want to make sure you're consistent either way. Like, you don't have it on one bullet point and not the others. You want to use a lot of action verbs and, again, tell your story. And we are here to help you with your resume. So you can set up an appointment on Handshake for like a one-to-one meeting, and we can go over that. Or you can submit it, as I showed you at the beginning, to that online checkup, and we get back to you within about 3 business days with some feedback over email. So either way we can help with, but just give yourself, if you want to get it reviewed before the fair, just give yourself plenty of time so that you don't get to like the day before and not have any appointments available. So I would probably do like a week or so before at the latest, if you're going to submit it. And I would look for an appointment even now, and you can book it like 2 weeks out if you're not quite ready to come in yet. So you could do it right before then. So now we're going to talk about the organizations, how to research them, and how to prepare for the fair itself. So a big part, so switching gears a little bit, a big part of any sort of interview or career fair is understanding who you're going to be talking to. So you really want to research these organizations so that you're not kind of going into a conversation where if they ask you why you're interested in them, you're like, I don't know, actually, what do you do? You want to be focusing your conversations when you're able to talk to them on their opportunities, on kind of the skills and experiences they're looking for, and on how you could fit into that, as opposed to like you knowing nothing about them. Like, it's okay to ask some questions, but like you don't want to go in knowing nothing about them. And so I think these are some areas to think about when you're researching them, just like looking at their website, look at their social media, like who do they work with? What's their mission? What do they do? Where are they located? Kind of what kind of clients do they work with? I think those are all good things just to look for and get a general sense of who they are and why you might be interested in working with them. And then when we think about preparing before the fair, another piece is thinking about how, and actually I should go back for a second. I showed you earlier, I want to actually, hold on, before we talk about this, I showed you earlier how you can see the fairs on here. So when you look at the fair, this is where you can see who is attending. So this is where I would look. So there's 20 employers right now registered to attend the School of the Arts Fair. So you can go in here and learn about any of these companies. So I would look at them here, see what they say here. Like, it might list what internships they're going to be hiring for, or what internships are currently on Handshake. But then you can go and learn more about them. I would visit their websites and I would do some research, and then think about like who, based on what you're learning, make a list of who you want to talk to. And then you can sign up to, after you've registered, you click, there's a register button here. After you've signed up, then you're able to see the available sessions to sign up with who you want to meet with. So you can sign up for the session and then do your research to kind of get to know a little bit more, or do more research. I would sign up for sessions with places that you're interested in talking to, and then do some more research. And we're going to talk more about thinking about preparing questions and things like that for them. So okay, to jump back into this. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to actually introduce yourself and speak professionally to employers. So let's see. Okay, so before the fair, we want to think about, many of you may have taken a class in the past or done something where you had to prepare like an elevator pitch. We do this activity in the Foundations of Speech CC 100 class. So if you took that, you might have seen this before too. But it's a kind of just a way of introducing yourself. So if you are, you do attend a session, either an individual or group session, and you're asked to introduce yourself, you have kind of a quick 30-second thing you can go to introduce yourself. And remember, especially, in the individual sessions where you're one-on-one, it is conversational. So you might not be kind of like giving this whole thing at once, but preparing it in advance helps you think of like good professional talking points. And if someone does say to you, like, tell me about yourself, you're able to kind of answer that question pretty quickly with this pitch. And it's good to think about this in general, like have this sort of in your back pocket throughout your career, because you never know who you could meet. But essentially a 30-second pitch is who you are. So that's typically like your name, your class year, what you're studying at Emerson, quick snapshot of like your key kind of skills and experiences that might relate to this position. You can see in the example, this student talks about kind of 2 experiences that they've had related to marketing. And then I want to know, to kind of round that out, what are you here for? Like, what brings you to be talking to this person at the fair? Like, I'm looking for a production internship this summer, and maybe you tell them one reason, like, I'm drawn to talking to you because, and that again will already show them you've done your research. So it's really those 3 components: who you are, kind of a key experience or 2, if you have it, or skill that relates to what this company does, what they're looking for, and then what you're looking for. So like, why are you talking to them today? So I would encourage you to take some time. So I'm going to give you just like 2 minutes here, because you can work on this later too. And you can just jot down. I'd like you to just jot down what you would say. We're not going to practice this because this is being recorded and everything, but we are going to just take a couple minutes to jot down what you would say. So I want you to write down, and I'll leave the questions here, who you are, what your name, school year is, major, a little bit about your background, which includes like education and work experience, and then what are you looking for? So I'll just give you 2 minutes and then we'll come right back. Okay, so we will get back into this. If anyone has any questions about that, when I'm at the end, feel free to ask them, and I can help troubleshoot if you're having trouble coming up with that. That's something we can also help you with, like on a one-on-one appointment. We can always talk to you more specifically if that's better for you. So again, so before the fair, so you have we know how to research and kind of some things to look for. We talked about how can you kind of introduce yourself professionally to an employer. And so continuing to prepare for the fair is review the list of employers attending. So I already showed you where to find that on Handshake. You can sign up for an available session. And then once you know who you're talking to and when, you can create yourself like a cheat sheet. So have notes, maybe some talking points, questions you have. So like, do you have questions for the recruiter about their internship program? Do you have questions about the company? So again, like, you've done your research, you know basically what they do, but you might have some more questions about the company. You might have some questions about like what they're looking for in an intern, like say, what's an ideal intern, or what kind of projects might an intern work on? Depending upon how much or little, like some of these companies will have internship postings in Handshake, but some might not have them up yet. So definitely review it if it's there, but if not, you can ask more questions about what they're offering. And then the day of the fair. So this is important. So you're going to be on video for these conversations, but you want to make sure you present professionally. So they're only going to see you from, say, like the, neck up or whatever, but make sure that the goal here is not like not being yourself. It's that you want to come across as professionally, and you don't want to have a lot of distractions. So you want the focus to be on what you're bringing to the table, like you presenting your skills and experience, and not on kind of extraneous things that could be distracting. So general business casual attire, the fields at Emerson are more on the casual side, but even if like, and I always said this to students when it was an in-person fair, like even if the recruiter is wearing jeans and sneakers or something, like you want to dress more professionally to the fair. So of course that so much doesn't matter because your top half is going to show up on video, but you want to wear, like, I'd wear a professional shirt, like doesn't have, not like a shirt and tie, you don't have to get that dressed up or anything like that, but like a blouse or a sweater, or you could wear a button-down shirt, just not like a t-shirt or like a hoodie or something like that. You want to just be kind of like neat and groomed, minimal jewelry, the minimal cologne or perfume actually doesn't matter here. That was in our last workshop, but just kind of, again, like you're trying to just avoid distractions and be able to focus on your skills and experience. So with the talking points, when you're able to meet them, you want to introduce yourself, refer to your 30-second pitch as needed, and then here's some other ideas of things to talk about. So you can ask them like what they're looking for, like I was saying earlier, talk to them about skills or experiences that relate to their hiring needs. You can ask about the next steps in the process, like the hiring timeline. And, again, this might feel repetitive if you're attending multiple sessions, but it's the first time you're talking to that person. So just remember that. So when you're making a good impression, think about the nonverbal factors. So part of that is what I mentioned, like what you're wearing, the grooming, also like the expression, like, you want to look positive, not as much as you can. Eye contact, I mentioned mainly because I know it's harder on Zoom. Like, you can look at the camera as often as you can. It can be harder depending on how big your screen is. But you don't want to be distracted or like looking away. So keep that in mind. So you might have to wait to speak to them, like especially if you're in one of these group sessions, there might be multiple students in the session. So just, remember to try to be as courteous as you can and avoid interruptions. I know that can be tricky sometimes on Zoom, but as best as you can, speak clearly. This is, it's a conversation. So it goes both ways. Like, remember that, it's not just about you. That's why it's important to have those questions prepared. Speak professionally. Before you end, if they haven't offered their contact information, I would ask for it so that you're able to follow up, which we'll talk about as well, and thank them for their time. Other tips, because this is specifically over video, so you have spent a lot of time on Zoom by this point, so you probably are really comfortable with it, and it's, but just make sure, like, to the best of your ability, you're going to be connected. You're not going to have interruptions. If you have notifications, you can turn off, like, I have things that like pop up on my screen. If you can hide those or turn them off, that can be helpful. So just to, again, avoid distractions, or notifications on other devices, anything you feel like is going to distract you, I would try to minimize and avoid if you can. Also think about like what's behind you on your video. I know that you might be in your dorm room, like that might be the way it is, but like make it as neat as possible. Like, don't have things in the background that you don't want them to see. If you have a roommate, like maybe you could talk to your roommate about, like, if you're doing this and they're not, like, can you have headphones on? Can they have headphones on? Like, how do you make this as distraction free as possible? Again, dress the part, be prepared. Some nice things about being over video or phone is that you can have like a cheat sheet out on your desk. You can have your resume out if you want to like kind of glance at it to remind you, if you're nervous about things that you want to talk about. You can have those talking points written down, like things that you want to be able to share in those questions. So just having it there, I feel like sometimes can help you feel more comfortable, like knowing that you can refer to it. And just like, try to be patient with yourself and stay calm. Like, it's nerve-wracking. Everyone goes into these things nervous, and it's a different format than we're used to. Like, the virtual fairs are still really new for us. We had one last semester, and that was, the first time we did it. And so it is nerve-wracking, and everyone feels that way. So try to be nice to yourself. After the fair, this is really important. You want to follow up with the people you spoke with. So again, if their contact info wasn't provided, I would ask for it. And within about 24 hours, you want to send thank you emails. So definitely, like, this can just be a short email, like thank them for their time. Maybe you reference, like, have one sentence about something you enjoyed learning about that really kind of affirmed your interest in the position. And you can attach your resume to this email just to kind of make sure that they have it. If they ask for other information, like, I don't know, if they asked for a cover letter or you talked about sharing a link to your portfolio or something, you could also include that in this follow-up email. If there are companies that you weren't able to connect with, like maybe the time didn't work for you or something like that, if you're able to reach out to them through Handshake, which I think you should be able to, then you can follow up with them as well. Or at least look at their opportunities to apply for, and then keep track of contact information. Like this goes back to like the whole internship search process, because also I'm guessing that many of you might be applying to things that you didn't find through the fair as well. I like to stay really organized. Create like, I find it helpful. You might have a different system that works better for you, but like a Google Sheet, and have like a tab for contacts, have a tab for organizations, and maybe one for applications. So you can have, like, on the contact tab, it can be people you know that are kind of like in your network, like whether they're, people you worked with in the past, or if you've had a conversation with an alum or had an internship before. This list might be very small at this point, but it's going to grow over the next few years. You can have in the organizations tab, it can be companies you're interested in. And then in the applications, anything you've submitted or applied for. And you can add detail, like, when you did that, when you talked to that person, what their contact info is, if you followed up. I think it's really helpful to stay organized and kind of have everything in one place. And then if you are seeking credit for an internship or you want information about that, you can contact us. And we also have a page on CareerBuzz about internship credit requirements. So we're almost done. But before we wrap this up, I want to talk about some common mistakes. So things that can kind of derail your plan a little bit is if you don't research at all. So again, you don't want to get into a room to meet with a virtual room to meet with an employer, and all you can think of to say to them is, so like, what does your company do? You want to show that you've done some research. You don't need to be like an absolute expert, but like, about the industry, you've done research on the company, you're interested in them. If you're not organized, like, this fair is a little bit different because it is virtual. So like, you're going to be signing up for slots. In an in-person fair, it's a little bit different. Like if you don't, the employers are just there. You're not signing up for time slots. But even here, I think being organized, so like, sign up for your slots, make sure you know what you're attending, what you're going to, have your cheat sheet with your, each of the companies you're going to be talking to, and some talking points you have for each of them and questions. That will keep you organized and kind of on track. You don't want to behave too casually. This is a professional event. You don't want to forget to ask for that contact info, because then it's going to be harder to send that thank you email. Make sure you're dressed appropriately, and that, again, you've minimized any possible distractions that you can. So again, here is the event information. So they're on the 16th for the School of the Arts and the 18th for School of Communication, both from 12 to 3. And you can access, I showed you those resources on CareerBuzz, but I am going to stop the recording and then I'll open it up to see if anyone has any questions.